some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome along. The Mark Steyn Show is live on GB News TV and GB News Radio. Feel free to mix and match. Tonight, we've currently got 2 horsemen of the apocalypse riding around. Can the rest of the gang be far behind? But don't worry, we'll try to see the bright side of the apocalypse. Lower property prices, maybe? And as ever, the only part of the show we can't do without your questions and comments. Email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. All that after Miranda Shunka with the news.
Hello, the top stories from the GB newsroom. Ukraine continues to be bombarded with attacks on day 8 of the invasion. Russian troops are around 15 miles outside Kiev's city centre. Elsewhere, the mayor of Mariupol is warning Russian forces have surrounded the port city and severed rail links. At least 33 civilians have been killed in a Russian airstrike in the northern city of Chernihiv. Ukrainian forces are battling Russian troops for control of Enerhodar, which has Europe's largest nuclear plant. And while Russia claims it's captured Kherson, Ukraine maintains its forces are continuing to defend the Black Sea port. A Ukrainian negotiator says the second round of ceasefire talks with Russia have not yielded results, but that a third round of talks will take place at the start of next week. The Ukrainian president says he will not surrender, but that some compromises must be found so that people do not die. Russian President Vladimir Putin claims his military has offered safe corridors so civilians can escape the war, and insists the invasion is going to plan.
Russian soldiers and officers are acting bravely, like true heroes. Our troops fight with persistence and full understanding that their cause is right. I will never give up my conviction that Russians and Ukrainians are one people.
The UN High Commissioner for Refugees says in just 7 days, 1 million people have fled Ukraine.
I have worked in refugee emergencies for almost 40 years, and rarely have I seen an exodus as rapid as this one. Peace is the only way to halt this tragedy.
Well, the International Criminal Court is launching an investigation into alleged war crimes. It follows reports that cluster and vacuum bombs have been dropped in residential areas. Moscow denies it's targeting civilians. The UK Foreign Office has sanctioned 2 further Russian oligarchs. The first is Russian billionaire Alisher Usmanov, whose commercial links to Everton Football Club have been suspended. The other is former Russian Deputy Prime Minister Igor Shuvalov. Both have been hit with full asset freezes and travel bans. Back here, 2 British supermarkets have stopped selling a Russian-made vodka as a sign of solidarity with the people of Ukraine. Co-op and Morrison's say Russian Standard, which is distilled in St. Petersburg, will no longer be on the shelves. Former Education Secretary Gavin Williamson has been given a knighthood. Downing Street says the Queen has approved the honour for the Tory MP, who has twice been sacked from the government. Well, on TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Steyn.
Remember the COVID? It was all the rage. Oh, what was it, a fortnight back? I thought this was rather inspiring. Governor Ron DeSantis arriving at the University of South Florida.
You do not have to wear those masks. I mean, please take them off. Honestly, it's not doing anything, and we got to stop with this COVID theater. So if you want to wear it, fine, but this is ridiculous.
Yeah, he's not wrong there. I was thinking the other day of Chab. Stéphane Charbonnier, the editor of Charlie Hebdo, slaughtered in a bloodbath by Islamic terrorists a couple of years ago. I had a very slight acquaintance with him. 2 years before his murder, he said, quote, "It may seem pompous, but I'd rather die standing than live on my knees." It wasn't in the least bit pompous, not from Chab. He lived and died it, and it's a stirring sentiment, but it's a little strange to see thousands of Ukrainians choose to die standing while being cheered on by citizens of countries who've been living on their knees for the past 2 years and apparently enjoying it. A Russian MP, Rifat Shaikutinov, said yesterday that, quote, "We did not prepare this operation spontaneously. It has been in preparation for a year, maybe more." So that would mean they started planning it almost immediately after the inauguration of the dead husk of a moth-eaten sock puppet currently in the Oval Office. Joe Biden is a literal dead man walking. Here he is purporting to walk.
President, Mr. President, are you worried about nuclear war?
Yes, Joe Biden walking, very focused on his walking. He can't answer a question about nuclear war because he's concentrating so hard on walking in his stylish black mask, outdoors, on a vast lawn with nobody in his path. Biden wears a mask outdoors just in case you thought the general decrepitude, the prompter squinting, the croaky mumbling, the inability to remember names, not just of foreign leaders, but of his own closest staff, in case you thought all that didn't quite communicate sufficiently American weakness and decline and decay, then the mask is the icing on a very stale cake. The West's enemies are various: Russia, China, millenarian mullahs, the Great Reset globalists of Davos under their leader Darth Schwab. Oh, can we have the picture of Darth, please? I love this picture of Darth Schwab. Ah, look at him there. Yeah, if you've read G.K. Chesterton's novel, The Man Who Was Thursday, you'll know that the men bent on world domination in that book hide in plain sight by having a big slap-up breakfast in Leicester Square every Sunday. That's the Klaus Schwab strategy. He dresses like a Dark Lord of the Sith, and he talks like Blofeld as he presides over the Spectre board meetings at his headquarters in his hollowed-out Alp. He boasts openly that he controls over half of the Canadian cabinet. Half of the Canadian cabinet he controls. Nobody in human history has ever before thought that worth boasting about. China and Russia, by contrast, are more conventional imperial powers. They've got kind of a good cop, bad cop routine going. China has taken over the world without firing a shot. Russia fires a lot of shots and is struggling to take over Ukraine. But if what that Russian MP said is true, it remains a deeply weird invasion. Where, for example, is the Russian Air Force or the Russian Navy? Yet Putin and Chairman Xi ultimately share the same goal as Klaus Schwab and the globalists: the destruction of the Western nation state, which has been the basic organizing unit of the functioning world since the Peace of Westphalia 4 centuries back. Putin didn't invade Ukraine to injure Ukraine. He invaded Ukraine to injure America and the West. And we are injured. NATO isn't sending troops because NATO has no desire to stagger from one quagmire to the next, a mere 6 months after Afghanistan. So as Putin and Chairman Xi surely foresaw, that leaves sanctions, which will hurt British and American and European citizens long before it ever impacts the Russian population. And it will damage the Western financial order and the dollar, leaving openings for alternative systems that entirely bypass America. And seriously increasing your heating bills too. The aim is to extinguish the Western nation state, which has taken a battering in these last 2 years, especially in Her Majesty's dominions, whether Scotland or Victoria, Canada or New Zealand, Wales or Western Australia, where entire populations are now so cognitively dissonant that the same people happy to be confined to their flats for the last 2 years are now cheering plucky Ukrainians taking a stand for liberty. Liberty. Liberty, isn't liberty a big super spreader event? Do you know your horsemen of the apocalypse? The first is the white horse, bringing pestilence from out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The second is the red horse of war, galloping into the Donbass. The third is the black horse, bringing famine. Do you know what they call Joe Biden? Bare shelves Biden. Can you guess why? Yes, there we go. The third horse of the supply chain apocalypse. And the fourth horse, of course, is death, which may be why Joe is being asked all those questions about impending nuclear war. What, you wanted a happy ending? Well, we'll try and get one before the end of the show today. Let me know your thoughts. GBViews at gbnews.uk or via Twitter at GBNews. Alexandra Marshall is the online editor of The Spectator's Australian edition, and we're always glad to see her. Alexandra, I always like your take on the big picture. And you have some interesting thoughts, like you think Russia is a much bigger threat than China. But give us the 30,000-foot view of how things look after this weird couple of weeks globally. We've gone from, Justin Trudeau freezing the bank accounts of Canadian truckers to Boris Johnson freezing the bank accounts of Russian oligarchs. What's the thrust of geopolitical events here as you see it?
Well, for the first time, Australia can finally say at least we're not as bad as Canada as far as freedom goes, now that Trudeau has done what he's done over in Ottawa. So we've got that going for us in Australia right now. But basically, it's not that Russia is a bigger threat than China, it's that Russia is crucial to what China is up to. So you've got two world leaders who are dictators who are moving together for the goal of usurping America as the world order leaders. And they've got the Islamic states there sitting in their pockets. So what we have to be very careful about is that the West, particularly America, does not move its assets out of the Pacific, because the real war, if it kicks off, will be in the Pacific with the invasion of Taiwan, which China threatens every other week. And you've got Japan sitting down there who said that they will defend Taiwan if China reaches to war. And if Japan goes to war, then America will have absolutely no choice but to join in. Australia, just by our sheer geographical location, will have to join. So basically all I'm saying is be careful not to divide the West's troops and interests, because we have to be there to face China, which is the biggest, most powerful threat in the world right now.
Well, let me ask you about that. What's the mood in Australia regarding American leadership of the free world? Because pretty much everywhere else among enemies and allies alike, what happened in Afghanistan has caused a lot of people to figure, well, look, it's the American imperium is over. America's 1950 moment has come to an end, and we got to look elsewhere. What's the thinking in Australia?
Australia is very able to tell that China is a threat to us. We've got Beijing in charge of some of our most strategic and important ports. They've been buying our land, and they don't behave like good neighbours for us down the Pacific. So we know that China is a problem. We know that Xi Jinping is a threat. And so in order to survive that with our tiny military, we require the US intervention. So we are well aware that we must maintain our US friendship on that front because we have no choice. So basically, we understand that Taiwan is a serious problem because it will require an enormous military incursion in the Pacific in order to take Taiwan. Most experts think it'll be the largest naval force ever assembled. And I think Russia is looking at that going, sure, because if China and America damage each other fighting in the Pacific, then Russia will sit there and just calmly keep moving across Europe without having to worry about the two forces over on its east.
Let me ask you something about the home front, as it were. You did a tweet that gave me a laugh last week or the week before, I think, that you would never have imagined that Australia, Canada, and New Zealand would all be competing in the in whatever you said it was, the most authoritarian world championships or whatever. And it's true. They've always been. I mentioned the nation state. The most normal nation states on the planet have generally been the English language nation states through the 20th century. They haven't fallen for any of the big ideas like fascism and communism and all the rest of it. But then they fell for COVIDism very badly, and in some ways crazier ways than on, say, continental Europe. I mean, so that, for example, in Australia and New Zealand, your guys have just suddenly started, oh, yeah, look at what Justin Trudeau's doing. Maybe we should try and get a bit of that action and use the fire hoses outside Parliament and all the rest of it. So why do you think that, as I said, normal, boring countries like Canada and New Zealand have gone slightly weird in the last couple of years?
Because we are peaceful. We have not had to fight for our freedom before, and so we don't have a level of distrust with our government that other countries which are older, and particularly the UK, which has spent so many, thousands of years fighting against and working out its government. We didn't do that. We sort of arrived here. We've always trusted our government to some extent. We've been bored with our government for most of our existence. And so when the government told people to be afraid, the helicopter generation who were coddled and who have seen nothing of the world as far as fear goes, they were terrified. And so it was propaganda 101 with an inexperienced generation who just went, oh, please save us, big state daddy. You're doing the right thing for us. And it's only a small fraction of libertarians who were standing there going, hang on a second, the government intervention is never a good idea, and it wasn't. It absolutely destroyed our country. So, yeah, it's basically a mixture of innocence as far as geopolitically speaking and historically speaking, and fear. It's all it was, just ordinary fear. And the one thing I will say about this Putin thing in Australia, we are so distrustful of our government after COVID and after what we were told about COVID that we now just think that everyone is lying to them. And I have been surprised by how many conservatives or libertarians are falling down the side of Putin and dictatorship simply because they no longer trust the press. And that, for me, has definitely shocked me in the culture wars.
Yes, it's a slightly odd situation. And at the same time, on the other side, you have all these people who have complied for 2 years with whatever the government says. Oh, get your 2 jabs. Oh, now you need a 3rd jab. Now, I'll keep my sleeve permanently rolled up so you can just access my arm as many times as you want. And and I know you're thinking of loosening the COVID regime, but I'd be quite happy to sit in my flat for another 2 years and just live through Zoom. These are the same people who have the Ukrainian colours as their Twitter avatar and are glorifying the people in the streets in Ukraine. What is that actually about? How do people who have basically given up all their liberties for 2 years, how come they're then suddenly inspired by the plucky Ukrainians?
Well, they can see tyranny abroad and how wrong it is to have your home taken or for an authoritarian dictatorship to roll in, but they are incapable of recognising tyranny at home because they believe they are doing the right thing. They've fallen into the old socialist trap of I've done the greater good, therefore it's okay to oppress my neighbours. So they can't see in themselves the hypocrisy of their position. Those are the people who are, have got three needles sticking out of their arm and are all pro-Ukraine. For some of us who are libertarians who are fighting for freedom, well, it makes sense for us to be fighting for freedom at home and fighting for freedom abroad. We're okay. It's the libertarians who fought for freedom domestically, but then are happy for Russia to roll tanks in, that I can't get my head around at the moment. And that seems to be, as I said, purely based upon a distrust of the press. And the West has done itself a massive, massive disservice by leaning into these global authorities and censoring themselves and coming out authoritarian on their own people because their people now don't trust them. And that is going to be devastating when it comes to global conflict.
No, that's really the big hangover from COVID is the ruination of trust. After the last 2 years, there are a lot of people who are never going to believe a word the government or the media say about anything ever again. Thank you very much, Alexandra. It's always good to see you. Alexandra edits the Australian version of The Spectator. The London version can be very unsound about a lot of things, but the Australian, I'm not saying anything I wouldn't say to those guys' faces, Alexandra. The Australians, basically it's Alexandra and the Aussies who are holding up the whole Spectator operation. So you should definitely check out the Australian end of the Spectator. Thank you very much, Alexandra, and we hope to see you again very soon. Thank you. Coming up, your reaction, plus Raheem Kassam and Brendan O'Neill. You can ask me anything for Stump the Steyn. We're going to see you in a couple of minutes.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It feels like the war is spreading. Earlier today, a Russian oligarch was found hanged at his mansion in Surrey. An Estonian ship was sunk by a mine in the Black Sea near Odessa. But of course, it is the people of Ukraine who are still bearing the brunt of this thing and pushing back. Ukrainian jets are reported to have attacked that Russian death convoy, the one that's several miles long, has been sitting out there for for some days, and many Russian vehicles are reported to have been destroyed in those airstrikes. Russia has also, though, taken the Ukrainian city of Kherson, a significant port on the Black Sea. We have Dr. Alexei Herman, who is actually in that town right now. He's not practicing medicine at the moment, though. Alexei, what are things like in your town right now?
Good evening, everyone. It's hard to explain. It's hard to explain because you need to see that. Now we have a real war, and all the city is occupied by the Russian soldiers. We cannot move. We cannot drive by the car. We only can walk, not more than 2 persons. And all the shops are closed. We have problems with the medicine. We have problems with the food. And we have no some possibilities to get this medicine and food here in Kherson from other part of Ukraine, because all the Russian troops are staying around the city, and it's really hard to explain. You need only to see that.
Just 8 days ago, life was normal in your town. You were going out to the shops, you were doing your work as a doctor. Did you think then, on Wednesday last week, that in a week's time you would be living under Russian occupation and under a Russian government regime?
I couldn't even imagine this, and it's really hard to explain. When you are when you have a normal life, when you have abilities to going abroad to visit some other countries, when you can do your work what you really like to do, and now we are sitting in the house. We are afraid to, and we have no possibility to go out. And I couldn't imagine that we will live such way in 8 days. And the most hardest day was it was 2 days ago when Russian troops they came. They not occupied the city. They came inside the city, and it's about 300 victims of civil people here, and it's really we all are afraid. It's really hard for us.
Vladimir Putin said today, he reiterated his point that there is no such thing as Ukraine, that Ukrainians are Russians. You're all the same people. Are there a lot of people in Kherson who feel Russian? Do you feel Russian, or do you feel that Ukraine and Ukrainians are a separate state and a separate people?
Of course, I'm a Ukrainian. I born here in Kherson. I grew up here. I'm working here. All my family here. We are speaking Russian language in our life, but we also speak Ukrainian. But we all feel us like Ukrainian people. We are separates, and I don't think that Russian and Ukraine are the same. It will be the same if I ask you, are American people and Australian people are the same? No, they are not the same. It's different countries. It's a different mind, and we have our own culture. We have our own language. We like our country. So Ukraine is Ukraine. It's not Russia, and for us, it's real problem.
Are the Russians who are controlling your city now, are they friendly?
I don't. I cannot say that they are friendly. We are not. We don't know what they do next. So we try not to communicate with them, and they don't friendly. They do not friendly, because 300 people died 2 days ago in our city, and I don't think friends do such way.
That's a sobering point. Do they seem to you to be careful about who they're killing and who they're targeting, or are they just hitting any old residential districts and kindergartens and hospitals, schoolhouses, or are they actually trying to target just legitimate targets?
I don't think that they choose what to destroy. Of course, they have some objects that they need to occupy and to need to destroy, but it's impossible to destroy something not to harm around, and with the other state buildings, they destroyed schools, kindergartens, and it's a real problem. Yeah. Everything is destroying. So it's a war. We cannot say it's something good. It's very bad. And when war came to your city, it's a big problem for all of us. And we're afraid about our lives. I'm afraid about the life of my children and about my business, about my work. So nothing good is happening now.
Well, take care of yourself, Alexei. We thank you. For speaking to us. And take care of your children too, who must be very confused. They have come and lived to date in a world at peace, and suddenly it is being blown apart by an invading army. Thank you for speaking to us, Alexei. They're from Kherson, which the Russians took just yesterday. Now let us get to your comments. Elliot, we were talking about the nation state. Elliot says, states working together for mutual advantage can accomplish much, but the bedrock of those alliances is still nation states. Moreover, even if a few countries join permanently as one, all you have is a larger nation state. Well, the idea in Europe has been that the European Union, which isn't anybody's idea of a nation, nobody in Sweden thinks that they're part of the same nation as Greece, but it is intended to supplant the nation state, Elliot, and whether that succeeds. I mean, this new European army, for example, who's gonna be the commander-in-chief who sends that army into action? 28, whatever it is now, 27 prime ministers and presidents all have to agree on that. Charlie says, no, if we just mean a set of arbitrary borders. The thing is, borders aren't arbitrary. And that's particularly true if you're in Alexei's part of the world, where the borders have changed significantly over the last 2 centuries, and it's actually taken quite a bit of effort to hold them in place where they are. None of these borders are arbitrary. As we discussed yesterday, Hungary borders Ukraine, but there are an awful lot of Hungarians in western Ukraine, in the Transcarpathia region. These lines aren't arbitrary. They're attempts to settle very complex questions. Mike says, no, it's the globalists in charge. That's right. Klaus Schwab thinks the world is the Davos guys think the world is so complicated that we can't have nation states run it. We're all too interconnected, so we need an elite of space lizards, or whatever the David Icke theory is. The shape-shifting space lizards from the galaxy of Alpha Centauri are the only ones sophisticated enough to be able to run the world from their ski lodge on top of that Alp in Switzerland. John says a nation state consists of a patriotic population who love their land and its history. It cannot exist when its people are divided into disparate pressure groups who despise each other and whose loyalty is based on ethnicity rather than nationality. That's the other end of it, John. On the one hand, we have these transnational institutions like the European Union, and then within each land, we don't think of ourselves just as citizens of a nation state equal before the law, but increasingly as members of far more specialized boutique groups. The other day, you may recall, the Prime Minister flew to Poland and held a press conference near the Ukrainian border. Nobody remembers a word he said because the whole photo op was hijacked by a so-called Ukrainian journalist, Daria Kaleniuk, giving an impassioned speech denouncing the PM as a coward for not shooting Russian planes out of the sky and bringing on World War III. It went viral, as they say, all over the BBC and everywhere else. And you had to turn to a publication called The National Pulse to find out that Miss Kaleniuk isn't any kind of reporter, but in fact one of Klaus Schwab's young global leaders, last seen on TV starring in a Joe Biden campaign ad. The editor-in-chief of The National Pulse, Rahim Kassam, joins me now. Rahim, I'm trying very hard not to get freaked out by that Boris Johnson press conference. The most benign explanation I can come up with is that, 99% of all politics is theatre, and this is just more proof of it. But on the other hand, it does seem to me potentially rather more sinister than that. What do you think is the real meaning of this woman stealing the show from Boris there?
Well, Mark, thank you for having me, by the way. Look, I think that the real malice here is not even with Daria Kaleniuk, who is a Ukrainian activist who was simply saying what you would expect from a Ukrainian activist, from her perspective, speaking to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The malice came from the corporate media in portraying this person as simply an objective, teary-eyed reporter who was simply, there giving some home truths to a man who is fundamentally out of touch on this issue. Now, Boris Johnson is out of touch on a whole raft of issues, but on this one in particular, I actually think that the Johnson government is going further and faster in terms of kind of this no-fly zone, pro-war narrative, actually, that we're seeing coming out of Western nations. So the problem here is actually what we're asked to believe rather than what happened in and of itself. And this keeps happening. It's happened throughout the pandemic. It's happened, obviously, with the Russiagate scenario over in the United States over the last several years. And it's now happening with the narrative surrounding the war in Ukraine. Remember, we were told on day one, these brave people on Snake Island said some curt things to a Russian ship before they were unceremoniously killed. We learned a couple of days later that they weren't killed, they were captured. We had the same thing with the model who was said to have taken up arms in defense of her country. We found out it was just a picture posed with an airsoft rifle and posted to her Instagram. She then came out and said, actually, I'm not fighting, I'm not on the front lines. And now we have it with this too. This is a World Economic Forum political advocate who is standing in front of the Prime Minister, writes columns, certainly opinion columns and analysis columns for left-wing news outlets, but is not a reporter. And the entire framing of this is designed to what? Make us feel emotional, make us feel afraid, make us feel empathy towards this cause. Well, I suggest that actually most good people already feel empathy towards the people of Ukraine who are being made to suffer as a result of geopolitical machinations that started over 10 years ago with Euromaidan and the expansionist EU imperialist mindset and NATO mindset. And I said at the time, I was in Kiev during Maidan, and I said at the time, this is necessarily going to lead to a war in our lifetimes, and here we are. So the grander part of all of this, and the reason we report this, and I resent, when we report things like this, people say, oh, well, this makes you pro-Putin. It doesn't make us pro-Putin. It makes us pro-truth. We're just trying to tell people who the actors really are, where their interests really lie, and why you should make decisions based on rationality and logic rather than decisions based on the emotions that Klaus Schwab wants you to feel. Most people feel bad for anybody caught up in these wars. We don't need agitprop to make us, good citizens.
Well, I'd agree with that. I think one's heart is stirred by the idea of anyone who wakes up in the morning and there's a smoking crater where the house across the street used to be, and you don't want these people coming into, like the doctor we were just talking to, you don't want these people coming into your town, you want to fight back. On the other hand, what was so weird to me about this particular woman is that she said, forget about, starting World War III. World War III is already underway. And she explicitly wants the RAF and the United States Air Force to be basically firing Russian planes out of the sky. So it's I don't quite know why. I understand the emotion of people in the West who like plucky little Ukraine. I don't know why they're so keen to take it to the next level, which would be World War III.
Yeah, I think I have somewhat of an answer to that. I think that a lot of the intelligence sources that were briefing the corporate news outlets like CNN in the first few days of this invasion were saying, Putin's having a mare, he's not really thought this through, he's not making as many gains as possible, they should have taken Kiev in 3 days, and in fact now it's been 8, and they were kind of mocking and goading the whole thing, whereas people on the ground were trying to relay that actually, no, Kiev is close to falling, there is obviously this huge convoy heading its way. The Russians began to indiscriminately bomb places rather than just targetedly bomb places. And so Ukrainians on the ground were saying, hey, this narrative that is being put up by Western media, which is actually making things worse and causing Putin to act more aggressively, are the things that are harming. And so as an act of desperation, they're saying, you're making things worse, and yet you're not willing to help. Listen, I have total sympathy for that. The problem is, and we have to look internally for this, the problem is our governments and our decision makers are not the ones who are actually leading the way in all of this stuff. It is the NGOs like the World Economic Forum. It is the Open Society Foundations and what they tell people to do on the ground that have provoked things like this. And that is no way excusing what Vladimir Putin is doing with his army in Ukraine, by no stretch of the imagination. But if we are a moral arbiter, if we are the people, the so-called adults in the room, as the Biden administration always likes to call itself, then we have to have an answer to this problem, not making it worse. And at the moment, Western media, for the most part, is making this worse, which is why I think you see a lot of this performance out there to try and make people feel certain ways.
Why do you think the World Economic Forum remains so respectable? I mean, their Great Reset video, which they issued like 3 weeks after the COVID got going. I mean, they issued it in spring of 2020. Quite remarkable. The second person speaking after Klaus Schwab is His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, who has actually no business hanging out with that crowd. Why do you think the World Economic Forum somehow remains a respectable thing?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on who you ask. I think most level-headed, ordinary people don't necessarily see multinational NGOs as respectable entities. They're certainly not transparent entities. They're not entities that have any level of feedback that the public is allowed to weigh in on. They're not elected people. They don't have a view towards what conversations are taking place at their conferences and what world leaders who all attend these conferences end up thinking as a result of this major institution and all of the machinations that take place around these things. But for the political elite, for the elite who have tub-thumped for war for so very long, who locked down your countries, who told you things scientifically that were true that ended up not being true, the World Economic Forum is effectively their safe space. It is a philosophical safe space, it is a political safe space, and it is a space that gives them backing whenever they feel like their backs are up against the wall. Who was one of Justin Trudeau's biggest supporters while truckers were in Ottawa protesting their rights for their rights, it was the World Economic Forum. Emmanuel Macron is one of their global young leaders. Dan Crenshaw is one of their global young leaders. These people, they sing from the same hymn sheet. The World Economic Forum is the safe space for the global elites.
That's a great way of putting it, actually, a globalist safe space. Thank you very much for that, Raheem, and you can follow him on Twitter. They banned him periodically. Oddly enough, the moment he exposed that lady at that press conference, his Twitter feed mysteriously disappeared for 48 hours or whatever it was. It's strange how that works, but it's there most of the time, and he's well worth following. You can read him, of course, at the National Pulse too. Coming up, you can ask me anything you'd like, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or you can Twitter me at gbnews, and Brendan O'Neill is here. You won't want to miss that. That's straight ahead. Don't touch that dial.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
and I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Somewhere in between the granular conspiracy theories and the big picture geopolitics is a country on the edge of the map whose cities are being reduced to rubble by the Russians. Brendan O'Neill is the chief political writer for Spiked. And Brendan, you wrote a piece professing almost unbounded admiration for the Ukrainians with what they're going through. And the thing that struck me about it is that you also sort of posited it as a kind of comeback for the nation state, that in the end there aren't a lot of things that people will fight for, but the one thing they will fight for is their country.
Yeah, and I partly did that because we've heard so much denigration of the nation state over the past few decades, and particularly in the UK over the past 5 or 6 years since the vote for Brexit. We've been told that nationhood is an old-fashioned idea. We live in a post-borders world, a post-nation world. Anyone who cares about national sovereignty is basically just a xenophobe. These are the kind of arguments we've been hearing for a few years now. And I think what Ukraine really demonstrates to the world is just how important national independence is and just how important borders are. You know, this is what protects us from external intervention, from external invasion. And it's also national sovereignty that gives real meaning and power to democracy. So I hope some of the people who've been poo-pooing the idea of borders and sovereignty and democracy for the past few decades will now wake up and realize that these are incredibly important values, so much so that people are willing to sacrifice their lives for them.
There's a difference, isn't there, in recent years in how Western Europe and Eastern Europe think about borders. I mean, when you're in Ukraine's part of the world, Poles and Slovaks and Ukrainians think of themselves as Poles and Slovaks and Ukrainians. In Western Europe and North America, there's a tendency to look on a nation state as Gate 27 at Heathrow. It's just whoever happens to be standing in it. So their view of nationhood is slightly different from where our leaders is in the West.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And that's one of the reasons why the European Union hates the country Hungary, for example, because the Orban government is very adamant about its national sovereignty and about its right to determine its own cultural values and its own political values without the EU breathing down its neck and trying to force it to become some kind of woke pro-trans, Black Lives Matter entity, which the Hungarian people don't want to become. So yeah, there is a very different attitude between Western Europe and Eastern Europe in relation to borders. I think in Western Europe, we have this really kind of upper middle class, luxurious belief that history is kind of over, that nation states don't matter that very much, that we can all just, navel gaze and obsess over our gender pronouns and live in a safe space, and the world has kind of come to a halt. I think what the Ukraine crisis has done has reminded us that history is still very much alive, and it's brought to the surface all those questions about independence and sovereignty and democracy that people in Western Europe would rather ignore or rather push down the agenda. So I'm really hoping that it brings us to our senses, and I'm hoping that the Ukraine crisis, as awful as it is, firstly, I'm hoping it comes to an end, but I also hope it makes us realize that history is not over, war is not a faraway phenomenon, and if you don't defend your nation, you could end up being in trouble.
Well, the end of history thing that got kicked off 30 years ago, we're certainly, with what happened in Ukraine, we're at the end of history delusion of the past 3 decades, I would think. You make a couple of historical comparisons yourself, though. I mean, we're actually seeing people from the UK, people from Canada, people from all over the world going off to join the so-called Ukrainian Foreign Legion. What do you compared it to the Spanish Civil War. I wonder, though, might it not be also similar to what happened in Bosnia, where a lot of, for example, British Muslims went off to fight in Bosnia and came back thoroughly radicalized? That if you're looking at it from our rulers' point of view, if these guys are going off to Ukraine and experiencing the visceral, primal urge of fighting for a clear cause, not fighting for the EU or for transnationalism, might they come back thinking about these things rather differently?
Well, that's a very good question. And what I'm hoping is that the people going to fight for Ukraine or offering their services to Ukraine, I'm hoping they have a rather different motivation from the British Muslims who joined the Bosnian Mujahideen, or even worse, of course, the British and European Muslims who went to join ISIS, Shamima Begum and those kinds of people who went abroad to engage in the most horrific crimes imaginable. And I'm hoping that the people going to Ukraine are fighting for something more progressive, to use an old-fashioned word, something more democratic, for the right of national self-determination, essentially, which is a positive thing to fight for. I think it's probably more akin to the British people who went to fight with the Kurds against ISIS, and who did so for pretty good democratic reasons. So I'm hoping it will be more like that, but we should definitely keep an eye on that. But the thing that I'm thinking is that, the reason I think it's admirable is because I think we've lost the fighting spirit in the West. We've lost the warrior ethos. If you look at what the Ministry of Defense LGBTQ department was tweeting on the day that the war in Ukraine started, they were tweeting about pansexuality, and there's this new movement for vegan uniforms in the British Army so that vegans don't feel offended by wearing leather or whatever else it might be. A few years ago, the British Army put out an advert for snowflakes. Literally, it had an advert for snowflakes to join the army because it said it needed snowflakes and their compassion. So we've lost the warrior ethos, we've lost the fighting spirit. And if some of our young and not so young people are going off to fight a war again for good values, I think that might also help to shake us out of this ridiculous, luxurious, post-history situation we found ourselves in.
I think that's actually the appeal of it in some ways, Brendan, that, yeah, it's terrible. They're running out of food, they're running out of water. They got no internet, so they can't be TikToking and Instagramming and Netflixing all day long like we do here. But the struggle is primal, and it's always good to be reminded that the struggle is always primal, even if your internet and your TikTok and your Instagram obscure that, as they do for us here in the UK. Thank you very much for that. It's a great column, and I recommend that people read it. Let's get to a couple of your questions before we close things out. Michael on email says, taking RT, that's Russia Today, taking Russia Today off air is a futile gesture and contrary to everything we believe in. Do you agree? Well, I'm a free speech absolutist. I fought free speech battles in various parts of the world. I got the law changed in Canada, although that creep Justin Trudeau wants to change it back. But because I'm a free speech absolutist and because I think it's useful to know what your enemies think, I think taking Russia Today, RT News off the air is pathetic. Fergus says, is it time for the... No, five, rather. I got this wrong way around. Fi on you, FEI. Maybe it's Fay, maybe it's Fi. Is it time for the honours system to be taken out of the hands of politicians who are using it as undeserving promotions and favours for friends and family? Well, I got no interest in this guy. What's name? I can't remember his name. I'm disinclined to remember his name, who got a knighthood today. I've got a bit of a problem with the honours system. They give it to politicians and they give it to showbiz people. So that basically any 60s, any geriatric 1960s rocker who didn't disappear in a drug stupor in the 70s is now a knight. So I think showbiz knighthoods are totally pointless. They give each other awards back and forth all the time anyway, so they don't need any other ones. And these political ones are bad. I'm in favour of real honours in the gift of the Queen. I would like some marquisates and viscountcies back, because that is a harder thing to get away with just giving it to hacks like whoever this hack was today. Okay, that's going to do it. It's Double Mark Dynamite this Thursday on GB News. If 1 hour of Mark is not enough for you, I've just been warming up the name for the real Mark. That's Mark Dolan up next for 2 Mark-tastic hours. I'll take the low mark. Ye take the high mark. Mark Dolan straight ahead. Stay safe, stay free.
Good evening. Light winds creating a slow-moving weather picture at the moment, which means for some, particularly in the east, tomorrow will be wet and dismal, whereas in the west it should be reasonably bright with some sunny spells. Here's the big picture. These weather fronts have been draped across the country, kind of just stagnating through the day today, and they're going to stick around during tomorrow as well, making for a dull, damp evening over eastern Scotland and northern England. The rain is easing off overnight across Wales, but staying dank and drizzly over the Midlands. Misty, murky conditions. Pretty poor on many roads, particularly the M6 this evening, but increasingly the A1M also with a lot of spray and surface water. Further west, clearer skies will allow maybe a touch of frost in Northern Ireland, but mostly we're staying above freezing. But it's not going to feel very pleasant under that zone of wet weather over eastern Scotland, northeast England during Friday. Rain at times over the East Midlands, East Anglia, perhaps the southeast, whereas much of the west will be dry and bright, some sunny spells. Just a few showers for Northern Ireland, South Wales and southwest England. It's in the south where we could reach double figures, but stuck under that rain band, as I said. Feeling pretty bleak, 5, 6, 7 degrees at the very best. That zone of rain isn't really shifting very far either during tomorrow evening, sticking across these eastern parts, and if anything, hinting at coming back as we head into the weekend. Clearer skies across Scotland and Northern Ireland mean a touch of frost here to start Saturday, but we should see plenty of sunshine here on Saturday. South East Scotland could be a bit dull and damp, and certainly the bulk of the Midlands, eastern England, seeing a lot of cloud, rain and drizzle on and off during Saturday. And again, as a result, feeling pretty cold, especially on some of those North Sea coasts with the breeze off the sea. But even with some sunshine, temperatures only 8 degrees in Glasgow and Belfast, and maybe only 6 or 7 on Sunday. Most places looking dry and bright on Sunday, but feeling cold, certainly across England, with that easterly breeze.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.